The explosion sealed us in with a deadly secret, but the decoy ledger only bought me minutes before the real hunter showed up with a chilling request. Save yourself, but find the true heir before dawn. The mahogany desk felt cold beneath my fingers, a stark contrast to the sweat slicking my palms. Outside the panoramic window of our penthouse, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver, a mocking testament to the life we'd meticulously built. My wife, Alara, stood across from me, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. She was usually the picture of elegant composure, but tonight her jaw was tight, and her eyes held a frantic energy I hadn't seen since our early dating days, the kind that preceded a disaster. "We have to move it, Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut through the expensive silence of the room. "Everything. Now." I leaned back in my Italian leather chair, trying to project a calm I absolutely did not possess. "Move what, Alara? The Q3 portfolio? It's already diversified across 3 continents. What are you talking about? Did something happen with the Gilded Trust?" The Gilded Trust. That was the euphemism for the bulk of our liquid assets, the fortune amassed over 3 generations, stretching back to my great-grandfather's dubious dealings in the pre-war commodities market. It was the bedrock of our existence, the invisible shield protecting us from the vulgar realities the rest of the world faced. Alara walked to the window, resting her forehead against the cool glass. "No, not the trust itself. That's too traceable. I mean the unregistered wealth, the contingency fund, the gold." My blood went instantly cold. The contingency fund wasn't just a rainy day stash. It was the family's secret insurance policy, a cache of physical assets hidden away for a doomsday scenario that everyone assumed would never come. It was substantial enough to fund a small nation for a decade. It was hidden in plain sight, or rather, hidden in a very obscure, very secure place only 2 people knew about, Alara and me. "Alara, we haven't touched that since 2008. I managed, my voice thick. "It's in the vault beneath the old estate grounds. The concrete is 7 feet thick. Why the sudden panic? Did someone see you accessing the manifests?" She turned, and for the first time, I noticed the tremor in her hands. She wasn't just worried, she was terrified. "It's not about being seen accessing it, Marcus. It's about being found accessing it. A warrant is coming. They aren't after the trust, they're after us. They're looking into the Foundation's recent land acquisitions, the ones we used to layer the shell companies." My mind raced. Shell companies were standard operating procedure. We were protected. Who is they? The IRS, the SEC. We have the best legal team money can buy. They can subpoena paper, Alara, not our physical assets. "This isn't the government, Marcus," she whispered, stepping closer, her eyes wide and dark pools reflecting the city glow. "This is personal. Someone is digging, and the way they're digging suggests they already know about the other assets, the ones we were never supposed to touch." "There are no other assets," I insisted, leaning forward, gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. "There is the trust, the real estate portfolio, and the contingency gold. That's it. You're letting stress get to you." Alara shook her head slowly. She reached into the deep inner pocket of her silk robe and pulled out a small tarnished silver key, a key I hadn't seen in 15 years. It was antique, ornate, and utterly unfamiliar to me, despite the fact that we shared everything. "This," she said, holding the key up to the light, "opens the lockbox at the Zurich deposit box we set up when we first got married. Remember? As a sentimental gesture? I told you it held meaningless trinkets and old love letters. I stared at the key, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. I remembered that day vividly, but the key had always remained in her jewelry safe. I had never asked to see what was inside. "It doesn't hold love letters, Marcus," she continued, her voice dropping to a chilling register. "It holds the original deeds, the proof. And if they find the proof before we secure the gold, our reputation isn't the only thing that burns. Our entire history gets rewritten, and I can't let that happen, not now that I know what you have been hiding alongside my family's wealth." I felt the blood drain from my face. What I've been hiding? "Alara, everything I have is legally ours." "No," she cut me off, her gaze drilling into mine with sudden, devastating clarity. "Your great-grandfather didn't just make his money in commodities, Marcus. He stole it. And he left a ledger. A confession, really. Detailing every transaction, every bribe, every life ruined. That ledger is why they're coming. And that ledger is not in the vault with the gold. It's not in Zurich. It's hidden somewhere you swore to me you'd never look." She tossed the silver key onto the desk. It landed with a soft metallic clink, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. "I need you to retrieve that ledger," she commanded, her eyes fierce. "Because the scandal isn't that your ancestors were thieves, Marcus. The scandal is that the only other person who knew about the ledger, the one person your great-grandfather trusted enough to keep it safe, was my father. And he didn't just keep it safe. He used it. For 30 years, my father blackmailed your family into sharing the wealth, controlling the entirety of the Gilded Trust. And now, my father is dead, and the people he was blackmailing, the original victims, have finally found the evidence that proves it all. They want their money back, and they are willing to destroy both our families to get it." I picked up the strange silver key, my mind reeling from the implications. My father, the man I idolized, was complicit in a massive generational blackmail scheme orchestrated by my wife's father, and Alara knew all along. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice raw. "If you knew my father was controlled by yours, why wait until the wolves are at the door?" Alara stepped back toward the door, her expression hardening into something unreadable, something purely strategic. "Because, Marcus," she said, resting her hand on the brass doorknob, "I don't just want to save our money. I want to take control of the narrative. I need the ledger because I'm not just hiding from the victims. I'm hiding from my own family. My cousins, the ones my father disinherited, are the ones funding this entire investigation. They think I am the key to unlocking the full family fortune, and they are willing to kill anyone who stands in their way. If you bring me that ledger, I can prove that my father's control was illegitimate, wipe the slate clean, and save us both." She paused at the threshold, glancing back at the silver key sitting beside my hand. "But you have to be fast. I've already initiated the transfer of the gold. It's moving from the vault tonight. And when you go to retrieve that ledger, Marcus, be warned. The location your great-grandfather chose wasn't just hidden. It was booby-trapped, and only one person knew the exact sequence of triggers needed to bypass the fail-safe." "And who is that?" I demanded, clutching the key. "Who knows the sequence?" Alara offered a faint, chilling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That would be my father. And since he's dead, Marcus, the only other person who might know the sequence, the one detail he never wrote down but showed to one other person years ago, is... The one person he showed the mechanism to years ago is me." The air in the room seemed to solidify, pressing against my chest. I looked from the tarnished silver key to Alara, who now held herself with the coiled tension of a predator who had just revealed its final trap. "You know the sequence?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You knew about the ledger's location, the traps, and the blackmail for years, and you married me anyway?" "Of course I knew," she said, her voice gaining a dangerous edge of triumph. "We didn't marry for love, Marcus. We married for synergy. Our families were intertwined by secrecy and threat long before we exchanged vows. My father needed your family's quiet compliance, and your family needed the shield of my father's influence to keep the SEC hounds off the scent of the original theft. We were the stabilizing element, and now the structure is collapsing. I need the ledger to solidify my position against my cousins, the entitled brutes who think they deserve the spoils of my father's careful maneuvering. The magnitude of the deception hit me like a physical blow. My entire marriage, the comfortable, privileged life I thought was based on mutual respect and shared ambition, was a carefully curated lie built on 2 decades of shared toxic secrets. "So, you're not trying to save us," I observed, picking up the silver key again, weighing it almost thoughtfully. "You're trying to save you. You need the ledger to control the assets, eliminate the evidence of your father's extortion, and neutralize your cousins in one swift move." "That's the executive summary, yes," Alara conceded, completely without remorse. "And you, my dear husband, are the perfect cleanup crew. You have the access codes to the final holding facility, the one where the ledger is kept, remember? The place your great-grandfather dubbed the Ark?" The Ark. I did remember. It was a ludicrously over-engineered panic room built into the sub-basement of the old ancestral home in upstate New York, a fortress within a fortress, supposedly housing nothing more valuable than rare first-edition books. I hadn't been down there since I was a teenager, following my father on one of his grim, ritualistic inspections. The fail-safe sequence requires a physical input at the primary door console followed by a biometric scan, I recited mechanically, dredging up memories from decades past. But the final step, the one you mentioned, the one involving the pressure plates. "Yes," Alara urged, stepping fully back into the room, closing the door softly behind her. The soft click of the latch sounded deafeningly final. That sequence involved a specific musical rhythm played through the internal comm system, timed perfectly with the biometric reading. My father played it for me once, years ago, when he was drunk and feeling philosophical about his legacy. It was a piece of obscure 18th century Italian counterpoint. He called it the Ode to Silence. My stomach churned. I had no musical talent whatsoever. My father, knowing I would never willingly participate in such a theatrical security measure, had never mentioned it. I only knew the mechanical procedures. "I don't know the music, Alara. I'm an investment banker, not a concert pianist. If I get the trigger sequence wrong, what happens? Does the door just lock permanently?" Alara walked around the desk, her movements fluid and predatory. She stopped just inches from me, forcing me to look up. The scent of her expensive perfume, usually a comfort, now felt suffocating. Worse, Marcus. The Ark wasn't just designed to keep people out. It was designed to keep what's inside from ever seeing the light of day. If you input the wrong sequence after the gold is already moved, the system initiates a complete self-contained environmental purge. We're talking about flooding the entire chamber with inert gas, Nitrogen, or perhaps something heavier. Instantaneous suffocation. Total obliteration of the contents. The ledger vanishes forever. And if the ledger vanishes, my cousins and the victims will know we failed to secure the leverage. They will then assume you double-crossed me. The implications were staggering. If I failed, I died, and Alara would be perfectly positioned to blame me for losing the evidence that could have saved her, or perhaps for attempting to steal it for myself. So you send me to a death trap, I whispered, feeling a strange detachment creeping over me. Why? Why not go yourself if you know the music? Her eyes flickered toward the doorway, a momentary lapse in her composure. Because I can't leave the city right now. The transfer of the gold is being monitored externally by my cousin Silas. If I disappear from the city grid, he'll assume I've made my move, and he'll accelerate his own plans. I need you to be the ghost, the distraction. You retrieve the ledger. You bring it to the designated drop point, the abandoned ferry terminal on Pier 47 at dawn, and only then will I provide you with the means to secure immunity. And if I don't trust you to meet me at Pier 47? I challenged, holding the silver key tighter. Alara reached out, not toward the key, but toward my chest, resting a hand directly over my heart. Because, Marcus, she murmured, her voice dropping to the intimate, dangerous register reserved for moments of absolute truth. The gold isn't just being moved to a safer bank vault. I've redirected the transport convoy. It's going to Pier 47 first. If you don't show up with that ledger by sunrise, my cousins, who are currently guarding the transfer, will assume you've betrayed me, and they will liquidate the gold shipment and everyone associated with it right there on the docks, including me. You see, Marcus, I need that ledger as much as you need to stay alive. It's the only thing keeping both of our heads attached to our necks. She pulled her hand away, turning back to the door, grabbing the handle. I've already arranged your flight itinerary and provided the access codes for the ancestral grounds. You have 4 hours until the gold convoy reaches the outskirts of the city. Go now. Get the ledger. Don't call anyone. And Marcus? I looked up, waiting for the final instruction, or perhaps the final threat. She opened the door just wide enough to slip through, her final words slicing through the tense silence of the penthouse. When you find the ledger, look at the final entry. I have a terrible feeling it doesn't just implicate our fathers. I think the true original victim, the person whose assets were truly stolen, wasn't a business rival, but someone much closer to home. Someone whose lineage we were supposed to protect. The door swung shut, leaving me alone with the cold glow of the city and the heavy weight of the silver key in my hand. Someone much closer to home. The phrase echoed in the sudden, terrifying vacuum Alara had left behind. My great-grandfather's original sin wasn't just corporate malfeasance. It was something intimate, something that had festered within the family structure for generations. I didn't waste another second on analysis. Alara had initiated the gold transfer. Time was the commodity I could least afford to waste. I grabbed the encrypted satellite phone she'd left on the side table, another contingency I hadn't known existed, and quickly reviewed the manifest for the flight. A private jet was waiting at Teterboro, prepped for an immediate departure to upstate New York. My mind felt strangely sharp, focused entirely on procedure, the emotional betrayal momentarily shelved for survival. I knew the route to the ancestral home, the sprawling Gothic estate that had always felt more like a mausoleum than a residence. The flight was a blur of muted cabin lights and the silent, watchful presence of the pilot. As we descended through the thick pre-dawn fog clinging to the Hudson Valley, the massive shadowed bulk of the Hawthorne estate materialized below. It looked even more foreboding than I remembered. Turrets piercing the mist like broken teeth. I was driven directly to the service entrance where a single aging groundskeeper, a man named Silas, whom I vaguely recognized from childhood, stood waiting beside a heavy utility cart. "Mr. Hawthorne," Silas grunted, touching his cap, his eyes shadowed by fatigue. He was one of the few old retainers Alara's father hadn't managed to fully integrate into his own network. "The convoy is moving through the county line now, should be nearing the city by mid-morning if you are successful." "The Ark," I said, bypassing pleasantries. "Show me the access." Silas nodded grimly and led me down a narrow, winding staircase, hidden behind a tapestry depicting a rather graphic medieval hunt. The air immediately grew cold and damp, smelling of iron and undisturbed earth. We descended into the bedrock. The entrance to the Ark was a seamless slab of matte black titanium, utterly devoid of handles or seams, save for a small recessed panel where the digital interface was housed. "The biometric scanner is here," Silas pointed with a gloved hand, "and the secondary panel for the music. It's inside the console. Behind the panel you unlock with the silver key." I nodded, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I inserted the tarnished key into the barely visible slot beneath the main scanner. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. A small secondary panel hissed open, revealing a complex array of tiny dials, indicator lights, and a minuscule input jack for an audio device. "The music," I muttered, pulling out the satellite phone where Alara had helpfully, or maliciously, uploaded a file labeled Ode to Silence. It was a delicate, almost unbearably complex harpsichord piece. "I have to time this perfectly." "The sequence requires 3 inputs, sir," Silas warned, his voice tight. "First, your thumbprint on the main scanner. Second, you enter the dial sequence for the counterpoint rhythm, 2 full measures on these dials. Third, you must simultaneously plug in the audio source and hit play at the exact moment the final dial settles into alignment." I took a deep, shuddering breath. This was the moment of truth. Failure meant nitrogen. I pressed my thumb against the cold glass of the scanner. A green light flashed. My print was recognized. Immediately, the small dials began to glow faintly. I started turning the first dial, agonizingly slowly, matching the tempo I could hear faintly in my head from the file on the phone. The first measure passed. Then the second. My hand was shaking so violently that aligning the third dial felt impossible. "Focus, Marcus. For the gold. For Alara." I forced my thumb to steady, nudging the final dial into place just as the harpsichord reached its high, piercing crescendo on the recording. I jammed the audio jack into the input port and hit play on the phone screen. For one horrific second, nothing happened. The console lights flickered red, and a harsh electronic alarm began to shriek, a mechanical scream that vibrated in my teeth. "Sir, you missed the timing," Silas yelled over the noise. But then, impossibly, the alarm cut off mid-shriek. The red lights winked out, replaced by a blinding, solid blue. With a deep hydraulic groan that shook the foundation, the massive titanium door began to retract into the wall. "You did it, sir!" Silas exclaimed, relief flooding his face. I staggered into the chamber, my legs weak. The Ark was vast, climate-controlled, and lined floor to ceiling with reinforced shelving. And there, sitting on a pedestal at the very center, was not a collection of rare books, but a single, heavy, leather-bound volume, the Ledger. It was even older, larger, and more ominous than I could have imagined. I strode toward it, ignoring the surrounding crates of uncut diamonds and bars of gold stacked like bricks. The contingency fund Alara had already arranged to be moved. I snatched the ledger. It was heavy, the leather cracked with age. I flipped it open, desperate to see the final entry Alara had hinted at, the detail that implicated someone closer to home than my father or her father. The initial pages detailed the systematic theft from the original textile magnates, the victims. The numbers were astronomical, the names laid bare. The Atherton family, the Sinclair lineage, and several others I vaguely recalled from old family lore as rivals who had mysteriously vanished from society pages decades ago. I flipped toward the end, my breath catching in my throat. The very last page, written in a frantic, spidery script that was definitely not my great-grandfather's, contained only 3 lines. It wasn't a confession or a ledger entry detailing the stolen money. It was a desperate plea, dated just 6 months before my own birth. He knows I was the only witness. He threatened the child. If I disappear, the key is to tell Marcus. Tell Marcus that the inheritance, the true one, was never the gold. It was the land, and that the true heir is not Hawthorne, but a daughter, hidden away in the orphanage in New Haven, the one named after the first victim's wife. I stared at the ink, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. Not the gold, the land, and an unknown, illegitimate heir. A daughter, hidden somewhere, named after the wife of the very first man robbed. Before I could process the implications, that my entire inheritance might be a lie, that my marriage was perhaps a complex maneuver to keep this secret buried, the satellite phone on the floor beside me began to vibrate violently. It wasn't ringing. It was receiving an emergency data burst. I snatched it up. It was a text message, encrypted, coming from Alara's unique security signature. The message was short, brutal, and contained a single attached photograph, a grainy surveillance image taken moments ago at Pier 47. It showed the gold convoy surrounded not by Silas's loyalists, but by heavily armed men in unmarked tactical gear. And standing at the forefront, addressing the guards, was Alara's cousin, Silas, the same groundskeeper who had just helped me retrieve the ledger. He wasn't just a retainer, he was leading the opposition. Beneath the image, one final line from Alara. He found me first. The dawn drop is compromised. Burn the ledger. I can't trust you with the truth about the heir. They are coming for you now. Get out of the house. Now, Marcus, run. And then, a second message, seconds later, overriding the first. Too late. They're already in the main hall. They know you have the original document. Marcus, the key you used to open the Ark? It wasn't a key to a lockbox. It was the activation switch for the entire estate's emergency lockdown sequence. By opening that door, you just sealed us both inside with Silas's extraction team. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The silver key wasn't just a sentimental trinket or a means to an end. It was the detonator for the estate's entire security grid. Alara hadn't sent me to retrieve a secret. She had sent me to initiate the siege. My momentary triumph in accessing the Ark had been the precise act that trapped me, ensuring that either Silas or Alara, or both, would control the narrative before dawn. The ground beneath my feet shuddered. The muffled, heavy thudding from above intensified, no longer the slow tremor of a distant convoy, but the heavy, rhythmic impact of men hitting solid oak doors. Silas hadn't been my loyal guide. He had been the final piece of the puzzle, ensuring the primary threat, the ledger, was retrieved while simultaneously locking the perimeter down to facilitate a clean capture. I spun around, the heavy leather ledger clutched against my chest, staring at the titanium door of the ark, which had already slid silently shut, the seam vanishing as if it had never been there. The blue light was gone, replaced by an ominous solid black. The music sequence had indeed been a dual trigger, opening the door for me, then immediately sealing it, trapping me with the only hard evidence that could dismantle the entire Hawthorne legacy. "Silas!" I roared, pounding on the solid wall where the console had been moments before. Only the dead, echoing sound of my own voice returned. I scrambled for the satellite phone. Alara's last message, "Burn the ledger," flashed on the screen, starkly juxtaposed with the photograph of Silas commanding the armed men on the docks. She had known he was a mole, yet she still sent me directly to him. Her concern for my safety was secondary to securing the document, and if she couldn't secure it, destroying it became paramount. I fumbled to open the ledger again, searching for any page that indicated a self-destruct mechanism, any chemical marker that would allow me to incinerate the evidence quickly. But the final entry, the one about the hidden heir and the true inheritance being the land, still held my gaze. A daughter, named after the first victim's wife. This secret was clearly worth more than the gold. The pounding above intensified, now accompanied by a sharp, metallic screech, the sound of industrial tools attacking reinforced steel. They were cutting through the tapestry door. I had no time. I couldn't burn it. The contents were too critical. If the original victim's descendant existed, that person held the ultimate claim, a claim far cleaner than the messy blackmail Alara and my father had engaged in. I looked around the ark. Stacks of gold bars, priceless diamonds, untouched for decades. A mountain of liquid wealth, utterly useless if I was captured or killed. I had to get out, and I had to take the ledger with me. I noticed something Silas hadn't pointed out, something obscured by the shadows near the back wall. A small, almost invisible ventilation grate, significantly larger than standard industrial vents, positioned near the floor. It looked like a relic from the original pre-Hawthorne construction of the estate. Hope, desperate and reckless, flared. I kicked a nearby stack of gold bars, a substantial shift in weight, hoping to jostle the ark's internal balancing mechanisms, perhaps triggering an error. Nothing. The structure was too robust. I grabbed a heavy diamond shipment box, its weight immense, and slammed it repeatedly against the ventilation grate. On the fifth impact, the cheap ancient screws holding the cover gave way with a shriek of tortured metal. Air rushed in. Cold, earthy air, far different from the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the ark. I could hear the commotion above clearly now. The tapestry door had finally torn open, and boots were stomping down the stone steps. "He's in the sublevel. Seal the secondary stairwell," a harsh voice bellowed, the voice of one of Alara's cousins, not Silas. Silas was still on the docks, proving Alara's message was a frantic, genuine warning about another faction being mobilized. I shoved the heavy ledger into my jacket, flattening myself against the cold concrete floor, and squeezed head first into the ventilation shaft. It was tight, agonizingly so, scraping skin from my shoulders and back. The shaft angled sharply upward, smelling strongly of damp soil and decay. Just as my legs were halfway through the opening, a blinding tactical flashlight beam pierced the darkness of the ark. "There he is, the vent! Get the cutting torch on that shaft!" I kicked backward wildly, hoping to dislodge something to slow them down, but my foot only connected with the smooth, cold surface of a nearby gold ingot. The light beam fixed directly on my exposed torso. Then the air in the ark changed. It wasn't the sound of a torch. It was a sudden, deafening hiss, followed by a strange, high-pitched whine that seemed to penetrate bone. The light beam wavered. "What is that noise? Are we venting the gas early?" the voice above demanded, laced with panic. I felt a sudden, violent pressure change in the small shaft, pulling at my clothes, trying to suck me back toward the ark. The inert gas. But if the gas was venting now, why was the pressure increasing? I looked down into the ark one last time before pulling with all my strength. Silas's men were staggering, dropping their weapons, clutching their throats. They weren't suffocating, they were convulsing. The pressure wasn't a simple vacuum, it was a focused expulsion. Then I saw what was happening. Lying on the pedestal where the ledger had been, a secondary containment unit, smaller, unmarked, had ruptured. It wasn't inert gas they were venting. It was something volatile, something clearly linked to the ledger's storage. A final chilling thought crystallized. The ledger wasn't just a record of theft. It was evidence linking the Hawthorne family to something far more dangerous. A biological contaminant, perhaps, or a weaponized strain. And in the chaos, Silas's men had broken the containment seal. As I scrabbled desperately upward, dragging my heavy body through the narrow metal tube, the sound of the strange, pressurized expulsion intensified, and the last thing I saw reflected in the blinding beam of the abandoned flashlight was the massive sealed titanium door of the ark beginning to visibly warp outward as if whatever was inside was reacting violently to the sudden exposure to the outside air, threatening to explode the entire sub-basement, and I was crawling directly above it. The pressure built to an unbearable pitch, feeling less like air displacement and more like the earth itself contracting around me. My ears were screaming, the high whine drowning out the panicked shouts from below. I tasted metal, sharp and acrid, a byproduct of the unknown substance venting from the ruptured containment unit. If the ark blew, the entire foundation of the estate would collapse, burying me alive in this narrow, suffocating passage. I hauled myself forward with purely instinctual terror, ignoring the tearing pain in my shoulders. I didn't know what deadly material Silas's men had accidentally unleashed, but I knew one thing. Alara had warned me about the traps protecting the ledger, not the ledger being the trap itself. The true danger wasn't capture. It was accidental annihilation. Suddenly, the narrow shaft ended, giving way to a rough, dirt-floored cavity. A forgotten root cellar, perhaps, leading to the estate's oldest, unmapped tunnels. I tumbled out onto the cold earth, just as the whine from below reached a deafening, tearing shriek. Boom. The explosion was deep, subterranean, and tremendously powerful, yet strangely muffled, as if the earth itself had absorbed the main shockwave. Dust, grit, and a plume of sickly yellow-green vapor erupted from the vent opening I had just vacated. The cavern I was in shuddered violently, and heavy clods of dirt rained down. I scrambled away from the vent, covering my face with my jacket, coughing violently against the caustic air. The ledger, still pressed against my chest, felt like a lead weight. The immediate threat of the explosion was over, but the residual contamination was clearly spreading. I had to get out of the estate. Fast. I found a narrow, brick-lined passage that seemed to lead toward the rear of the property, away from the main house where the confrontation with Silas's men must be taking place. The ledger was burning a hole through my jacket, demanding to be seen. I ripped it open one last time, scanning the final entry. The true heir is not Hawthorne, but a daughter, hidden away in the orphanage in New Haven, the one named after the first victim's wife. The first victim's wife. I vaguely remembered the name from the index pages, Isabella Sinclair. The hidden heir was a daughter named Isabella. Just as I processed the name, my satellite phone blared back to life, receiving another transmission from Alara, a real-time video feed this time. The quality was poor, grainy, but the setting was unmistakable. The opulent back lounge of a high-security transport vehicle. Alara was there, looking severely pale but unnervingly composed. Facing her, across a small table, was Silas, no longer playing the loyal groundskeeper, but wearing the grim, entitled expression of a true Hawthorne cousin. He was holding a pistol aimed steadily at her temple. "You miscalculated, Alara," Silas sneered in the video. "You thought your ghost husband would distract us long enough for you to secure the gold transfer. But you forgot who funded the research into your father's blackmail operation in the first place. I knew about the ledger, I knew about the Ark, and I knew about your weakness, Marcus." Alara didn't flinch. "You don't know what's in the ledger, Silas. It's not just dirt on our fathers. It names the true inheritor, the Sinclair line. You try to seize the trust now, and you invite decades of legal warfare from a legitimate claimant you can't buy off." Silas laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "Oh, I know what's in it, Alara. I've known about the Sinclair heir for years. That's why I let you think you were in control, because I needed you to bring the ledger out of the Ark. That old fool, your father, never trusted anyone with the final location. He knew the gold was traceable, but the ledger itself was the leverage. When Marcus activated the lockdown, he sealed you in with me, just as I planned. Now hand over the ledger, or I use your death to frame Marcus for your disappearance and seize control of the trust immediately." Alara met his gaze, her eyes blazing with a ferocious, final defiance. "Marcus won't be delivering the ledger to Pier 47, Silas. He knows you're a traitor. He knows the only way to win is to nullify the source of the power altogether." Suddenly, Alara's hand flashed downward. It wasn't a weapon she produced, but a small, ivory-handled lighter, an heirloom from her side of the family, the one she always claimed was for lighting the fireplace. She flicked it open, held the flame beneath the corner of the ledger she had apparently smuggled out during the chaos in the Ark, and in the video feed, the ancient leather instantly caught fire, the pages curling into black ash. Silas roared in fury, pulling the trigger of his pistol. The screen went dark, the sound of the gunshot swallowed by static. I stood alone in the damp earthen tunnel, the ledger, the real ledger, heavy in my hand. Alara had played one final devastating hand. She hadn't sent me to retrieve the evidence for her. She had sent me as a decoy, knowing Silas would chase the documented proof. And she had burned a ledger, a sacrificial copy, to convince Silas that the threat was neutralized, buying me the window I needed. I looked down at the original book in my hand, the one Silas believed was still on the docks or already destroyed. My mind snapped to the orphanage in New Haven, the name Isabella Sinclair. The land was the true prize, and the gold was meaningless leverage compared to legitimizing a claim that predated the entire Hawthorne empire. Alara and Silas were now locked in a battle over tainted assets and a dead-end decoy, while I held the key to true power. I had to move now before the residual gas cleared from the tunnels and the full scope of the explosion was revealed. I checked the time on my phone, 5:45 a.m. Sunrise, and the compromised drop, was still half an hour away. I started running toward the edge of the estate grounds, the true inheritance clutched tight. My goal was no longer survival, but justice for the original victims and securing the future of the land itself. As I burst through a final overgrown hedge and onto the deserted county road, I saw two things. The sky was just beginning to turn a bruised purple, signaling dawn. And approaching rapidly down the road, lights blazing through the thinning fog, was a single, black, unmarked sedan, moving with the unmistakable velocity of a vehicle that didn't intend to stop for anything. It wasn't Silas's men. This speed was too controlled, too professional. And behind the driver's seat, I saw the unmistakable silhouette of a woman holding a rifle across her lap. A woman with Alara's elegant posture, but whose face, even in the gloom, seemed utterly unfamiliar, cold, and utterly focused on the prize she knew I carried. The dead-end chase for the gold was over. The real hunt for the heir, and the man who held the map to her identity, had just begun.